McGurk! I love
Not mess
typing.
with my Google Docs, Meeksy.
Supergirl Radio is going live every night of the week. How do you like it? Is becoming a human burrito a plus or a minus? I don't know. It does seem snug.
I mean, they say you are what you eat.
Kira. I love that.
So I do a podcast called Supergirl Radio, and one of our segments is Lena Luthor, Boardroom or Ballroom, because really?
She looks like a boss in this coat.
Is Nasty Luthor like a different Luthor? It's not just Lena being mean?
No.
Helen Slater here. It's so fun to know that you're hosting a podcast called Supergirl Radio.
Welcome to Supergirl Radio, your source for all things related to the CW Supergirl TV series and the character of Kara Zor-El. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and for this episode of the podcast, I am joined by a very special guest, comic book writer Morgan Glennon. So welcome to Supergirl Radio, Morgan. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you. And I have to say, I'm a longtime fan of the podcast. I think what you guys do here, you and your co-host, who I hear is talented and beautiful, it's just great stuff, guys. First time, long time.
She contributes a great deal to the podcast, so I really do appreciate her very, very much for talking about Supergirl and talking about Supergirl with me, and also putting up with me. So that's good to hear your perspective on that. Of course, Morgan Glennon is my Supergirl Radio co-host, but now we can say that she is also a comic book writer, a longtime comic book reader, now dipping her toes into comic book writing because she has written a story for By Visibility, a bisexual anthology, still by a Kickstarter project that will be launching soon, or maybe already by the time this has been recorded, will have already launched.
I think it will have already launched when we get this live. So go support it.
So if you are in the future watching this or listening to this, please check the audio show notes or the video description for a link to the Kickstarter so that you can back the project if you would like to. And if you would like to back the project, please do so to support Morgan. Well, because we normally talk about reading comics here on Supergirl Radio, we've done that quite a bit. We talk about comics, we analyze the comics, and we have also interviewed other comic book writers. I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be fun to interview Morgan about her experience writing her comic book story, because she is now a comic book writer. So I have a lot of questions that I want to pose to you. So the first one is, what inspired you to be a writer? Not just like a comic book writer, but how did you get started in writing? How and when did you first learn to love writing?
That's a great question, Rebecca. Thanks so much.
Tell me your origin story in writing.
My origin story, it really does go way back, though. When I was little, everybody, asks little kids, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so I said a veterinarian, clearly, obviously.
That's so funny. I did too when I was in third grade. I wanted to be a vet, but then I learned about how much science and math was involved, and I was like, forget it.
Oh, yeah. See, mine was different. So I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I learned that there was going to be like blood involved, like blood surgery, and like not all of the animals were going to make it.
Right.
And I was like, well, no, I had been led to believe that being a veterinarian means petting the dogs and petting the cats.
Sounds great.
That's about it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, that's not what I signed up for. So I'm pivoting. At a young age, I had to pivot my life dreams. And I was like, well, what else do I like? And it turned out that it was reading, and I like to write. I always wrote, kind of like as far back as I can remember, I always wrote little stories. And so I was like, fine, then I'll just be a writer. A very easy and reasonable life goal to attain. I'm sure I will make lots of money. Little Morgan knew nothing, uh, and was wrong about everything. So
What kinds of stories was Little Morgan writing?
Little Morgan was writing all kinds of stuff. Little Morgan was writing a lot of fan fiction because she
Okay.
loved Sailor Moon. So it was
Oh,
like,
Sailor Moon stuff.
what was
Okay.
Sailor Moon doing? I also wrote like for like school assignments. I would like write little stories. I we used to get these like vocabulary assignments, which was like, just use the vocabulary words in a sentence. And because this is the kind of monster that I was as a child, I tried to make the sentences into like a little story, thereby ruining it for the rest of my class. Because when I turned in a couple of those, the teacher was like, "This is great. Everyone should do this." I was popular. So as far back as I can kind of remember, I was writing stories, and my dad always used to like tell me stories. Like we would be driving down to the beach, and he would tell me these crazy stories about like tiny people who like lived in your pocket, or like a little mouse society and their little mouse problems. So I feel like it kind of went way back to like liking storytelling and being like, oh, I want to do that too. So I would just like write, when I was little, and then even in like, in high school, and then when I got to college and I had to pick a major, I was like, what should I do? So I thought about English, but then I was like, again, would love to feed myself. So I picked a more reasonable, what I thought was a more reasonable major, which was journalism, which I'm going to pause here for laughter. Because I wanted to feed myself with that one. Uh, so so then I went into journalism and did like, I learned about journalism writing, which is definitely a lot different than like creative writing. And got to do that for a little while. And I did some freelance work once I actually got out of college and started working at like a Japanese newspaper. But then I was like, oh, I don't know Japanese, so I can't actually write anything. Well, so womp womp. So that's why I started to do some freelance writing about like television and entertainment stuff that I was kind of into at the time. But it wasn't until like the last, I'd say, the beginning of the pandemic, suddenly, surprisingly, I found myself with a lot of time on my hands. Imagine. And so somebody I knew had told me about these like creative writing contests called NYC Midnight.
Yeah.
Which is basically like flash fiction contests. And so I was like, well, that could be fun. And I haven't done creative writing in a long, long time. So that would be really fun. So I just started doing a bunch of those. And it's been great to kind of like, you know, strengthen that creative writing muscle again and just kind of write. No, I can't just write for myself, because every time I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna write tonight," I just don't do it. But I can if there's a deadline. So that's been very helpful. So yeah, so I feel like I've been kind of writing all along. Not like commercially though. So again, the money portion of it has escaped me entirely.
Deadlines are good motivators for
They
sure.
really are.
And I don't want to tell you how to live your life or what to do,
Sure,
but
do it.
I think you should take those stories that your dad, this is my suggestion,
Mhm.
that you should take those stories that your dad made up or told you, and I think you should do something with them. I think that would be really
Yeah,
cool. You should maybe I don't know if those would be like a children's book or some sort of young adult novel or something, but I don't know if you wanted to stretch those muscles some more. I don't know. That would
that's a
be
great
my
idea.
suggestion.
That's a great idea. We always used to tell my dad that, like, you should write a children's book, because he would just like make up these stories on the fly. Because I was like, I'm in a bad mood and I don't want to eat my dinner. And he'd be like, I'll tell you a story if you eat your mashed potatoes. So yeah, I think he really missed out on a perfect opportunity to pump out a bunch of children's books called Please Just Eat Your Food.
That's a great title of a book.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to suggest that if you ever had some time on your hands. Well, in terms of, so we've gotten your writer's origin story, but what's your comic book origin story? What got you into reading comics?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to my girl Sailor Moon, always and forever. Uh, Back when I was little and Sailor Moon was like coming out, I was like, well, this is the best television program I've ever seen. Emmys, Peabodys. And I was like, I must know more about this show. So, that was back when the internet was like a GeoCities page with like flashing background. It was all really to give you a seizure. That was the
It
goal
was a
of the
great
internet
time.
back then. It was I can't stress enough how great of a time it was and how much I prefer it to now. If only every webpage could have those little like visitor counters still on the
Yes.
bottom. Man, those are good. So I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is based off of a comic book. And I didn't really read comics at the time. But I was like, okay, let's pick up the Sailor Moon manga. And I that got me into Japanese comics. So when I was little, I read a lot of manga. I was like kind of a snob about it. I'd be like, do you want to read this Superman book? And I was like, from America. What am I, a peasant? Get that out of my face. So I never really read like traditional superhero comic books because I was really reading, like Magic Knight Ray Earth and Utena and all that kind of stuff. And then it wasn't until I got older and like the Marvel movies started coming out, and some of the DC movies too, that I was like, oh, I used to love comics way back in the day. I should try out some comics. So I feel like it was what got me back into it was probably like Hawkeye. I think the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run, like back in probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. I picked up because Sarah recommended it. Sarah, friend of the podcast, recommended it. She
Team
said,
Werewolf.
it's so great. Team Werewolf. Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. She recommended, she's like, oh, it's so great. And then she recommended Saga, which is the one I was complaining about in our, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow number 8. That like they take long breaks and I'm so behind. And then before I knew it, I was reading a bunch of different Marvel titles and I was reading, a couple of DC titles and like seeing what was going on with some of the characters there. And then, doing this podcast has obviously really, expanded my comic book knowledge. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that Smallville, improved my Superman comic knowledge because I didn't really read superhero comics in like high school, but I did know a bunch of stuff about Superman comics because of Smallville. It was like, oh, they're introducing this person. I was like, well, what does he do in the comics? So yes, I need to give big ups to Smallville. Begrudgingly, as always.
Yeah, now you know about kryptonite gum and
I
the
do.
devastating effects that can have on those who chew it.
Remy Zero, never forget.
Remy Zero forever. Well, that's really interesting. Now I'm curious. What about the Hawkeye run? Was did what made you gravitate towards it?
I liked that it was more like I've always thought because I didn't read a lot of like superhero comics or big 2, big 3, whatever comics. I thought of the superhero stuff as being way more like this person is fighting this person and it's the end of the world and everybody's mad and like those team books, where everybody's teaming up to fight a central villain. I thought everything was like that, honestly. And I was like, oh, that seems exhausting. But Hawkeye was kind of just about a guy who could barely function on his own, just living in New York, trying to outrun a tracksuit mafia that only said the word bro. And he has a dog and he has complicated relationships with all of his exes and he's got like a mentee that he's trying to take care of, but she's, doesn't really listen to him. And it was very ground level and it was very like the story was grounded and felt kind of more real. And it just kind of felt like very day in the life, which I liked. I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to have the backstory of like 300 years of comic book mythology to understand that like Hawkeye likes coffee and he doesn't like crime. I was like, great, I got that. And I think at that, I got lucky because at that point, I think Marvel was having, going through a period where it was doing a lot of these like individual like ground level stories with the different heroes. So I think that was around the time that they launched like Miss Marvel, and they had like a good Black Widow run, and it was like a couple of like individual titles I found, oh, these are more accessible. It's just about one person and their whole deal. It's not like 15 characters, 10 of who I've never heard of. And if I miss Superman number 252, I'm never going to understand what's going on in here. It was like, I feel like the individual books made it more accessible for me to like jump in. I've since really like gotten into, I read a bunch of Wonder Woman's runs, obviously Supergirl. I read a bunch of like She-Hulk, and Miss Marvel and Black Widow. And so I find that the individual character stuff I like a lot more than like the, Avengers or the Justice League or whatever, because it's like once it gets to be a bunch of characters, it gets really complicated, and then like my brain explodes. I'm like, oh, I needed to cross-reference that issue. I can't do it.
Yeah, so it sounds like you gravitate more towards the character
Yeah, the
centric
character
stories.
stuff I
Yeah.
really like. And I think the visual medium can really help with the character stuff. It's kind of like, the same reason we enjoy TV and movies and stuff like that. There's that visual component.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to like those stories a lot more. I'll read the punchy into the world stuff, but I like the character based stuff too. It's easier to get into. I find.
It
Uh,
is. It is.
so interesting. Okay, well, so you wrote this story for By Visibility, a bisexual anthology, still by. So how did you get that opportunity? How did the opportunity present itself to you? Maybe I don't know. Is that the best way to put
I
that?
think so.
Did you want to write a story, or did the story come to you?
I wanted to write a story, and then and then it was kind of delivered to me. So what ended up happening was that this is basically like part 2 Electric Boogaloo of the By Visibility anthology. Part 1, Kat launched, my co-host on Legends of Tomorrow podcast, last year. And it did really well. And I thought, oh man, that was so cool. I wish I had like put in for that, but I didn't. And then she was doing a part 2, but she was soliciting pitches for it over Christmas, and I was really busy over Christmas, not getting to go to Disney World because my flight had been canceled, and so still bitter. And so I was talking to Kat one day, like right after that, and she was talking about putting together the second part of the anthology, and I said to her, oh, I wish I had submitted for it, but I was just really busy right then. I didn't really have the time to do it. She said, oh yeah, definitely. Like, well, the next time I'll let you know in advance so you can get something together. And I was like, that sounds great. I thought that's where it was going to end. And then about a week later, she texted me and said, like, we just had somebody's story drop out. Would you want to hop in at the last minute and take their place? And I was like, sure. I've done a lot of writing competitions, and now I'm ready to do things very fast. But it turned out it was like really great experience for having to hop in at the last minute and do something. So she sent over a couple of different pitches for different stories that they were thinking about putting into the anthology to give me kind of like a jumping off point, which was great because the thing I liked about doing those NYC midnight contests was that they would give you like prompts. Because like for me, sometimes the hardest part is starting and having an idea.
Yeah.
But if you give me like, well, it has to be in an igloo, I'm like, okay, that's somewhere to go. Like, I can't boil the ocean. You can't say you can write about anything. I'm like, I don't know. But it's like, you have to write, about a small kitten making a journey across the United States. And I'm like, that kitten's going to go on some adventures. So
I want to read that story.
Right? Me too. It's basically.
Does the kitten end up in the igloo?
I think, yeah, now I think she does.
Yeah.
Go, go.
Meets a penguin friend.
Oh,
and
man.
Then they just have
We're writing one of those children's books right now.
Arctic adventures.
I love that for all of them involved. Like, I love that journey for that kitten. But yeah, Kat sent me like a couple of like prompts, like, oh, here are some, things that we were thinking, like literally like one sentence things, like, here's what we were thinking. Like, if you want to take one of those, you can go with it. So I was like, okay, I'll take one of those. And I think I turned it around in a weekend weekend.
Wow.
Maybe
So
a
just a
weekend.
couple of days?
It was a couple of days. I feel like I found out about it at the end of the week, and I had like submitted her the first draft on like the beginning of the next week because I knew that she had like
Wow.
a tight, they had like some tight deadlines, and I had already told them that I could get it turned around fast, and I was like, why did I do that? So yeah, that was kind of what how that came about. And it was kind of a crazy experience because I had to do it so fast that I feel like I didn't have to overthink it, which is great for me because I would have.
Yeah. You could definitely go back and go back and go back and try to
Mhm.
fix things and fix things and fix things. But deadlines are good for that. Well, can you give the listeners and the viewers a little tease of what your story ended up becoming? Maybe
Yeah.
don't spoil everything, but like just a little short description.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the shoes of our great description writer friend Veronica. How would
Okay.
Veronica describe
I
your
get to
story?
be my own Veronica. That's the Veronica of my own life. Okay, that's great. Actually, it's like the Veronica of my own story. Okay, so the story is about a pop star who just went through a bad breakup, and she goes through a couple of pretty dramatic things in the getting over that breakup, and she meets someone new who is a woman, and then she has to decide how she wants to come out to the world. And so that's sort of the crux of the story. And I will say that the log line that Kat gave me was like a Taylor Swift esque pop star comes out, and like that was the log line. And I had a whole story plotted out about how this was going to go. And then as I started writing, I thought of a stupid joke that changed the entire story, essentially. I, like, started writing and I was like, "Oh, it would be really funny if she did that." And then everything else about the story had to change because, like, her love interest's job had to change dramatically. And so that was definitely a case of, like, I had it all plotted out, and then I was like, "I think this is better. I think this is funnier." So it's very like it's a very rom-com story essentially. I think it's like 8 pages, so I didn't have a lot of real estate to work with. It is an anthology, so there's a bunch of different stories in this anthology. So mine is just one of them. And I think 8 pages is honestly one of the longer page counts too for one of the stories because
Oh.
I cannot be brief or concise in any aspect of my life. And so writing is the same way. And so I was like, oh man, if you're telling me what the max page count is, that's what I'm doing.
So that's interesting. So did you just write the story and then so I have a lot of questions about the format of how to write this because I've talked to a couple. I mean, on the podcast here, we've talked to several different comic writers, and I've listened to interviews and read interviews, just in written form about the process. And everybody seems to do it a little differently. So that's interesting to hear that you chose the 8-page count. Now, was that because you just happened to write 8 pages, or did you write it as 8 pages?
So I wrote it. Yeah, I wrote it as 8 pages. So Kat is the expert. Kat, my co-host on the Legends of Tomorrow podcast, has done many comics, has done comic projects. She's the queen of Kickstarter. She has a webtoons called Slice of Life that she writes with Phil, her co-writer. So I was in good hands having never written a comic because I was just like, so one of the things I asked her to do is, and I had supported the first and by anthology. Obviously, I'm a good friend. So I had the issue because I always like if I'm going to support it, I might as well get the paper copy, right? So I had the issue, and so I asked her to send me a bunch of the scripts. So what I did was I read the first anthology, and then I looked at the scripts, and then I would like refer back to the anthology, the published comic form, and I would see how they turned that script into the comic. And when you say that there's not, everything is different, it's so different. Like the scripts for so many of the different ones that she sent over from the first anthology all of the scripts looked different. So that was fun. And I was like, oh, okay. So there's no standard. Great. That's not stressful at all. So I can just kind of do what I want. So I just kind of saw like the basic formatting that, you tell the page number, you tell the panel number, and then you say what's going on in the page in the panel. So yeah, so some of the examples that you put up here, like here's page 1, panel 2, right? So that would be the second panel on the page, and I'm just, I'm giving some detail about what the main character, her name's Olivia, what her house looks like. So it's ultra modern and ultra expensive. And she's in sweatpants and she's eating a giant Costco-sized bag of cheesy poofs. She's not doing well, right? The cheese dust all over her face. I put in the description, she is not doing well.
I have to say, reading that, I can hear your voice in the italicized, not doing well.
She's had better days. And then, it says, we see the TV screen and it's like an Entertainment Tonight show. And then the headline is about her heartbreak. So yeah, so I'm giving descriptions for the artist of like how to draw this scene. And I don't think that I don't know that there's a ton of dialogue in the scene, but it's basically like scene setting. So this is what I want the house to look like. This is what I want her to look like, that she's kind of a mess. And this is what she's looking at while she's, downing a Costco-sized bag of cheesy poofs.
So how did you I have questions related to these things. So I guess the first one, since we've been talking about panels, is were you given a certain number of panels that could be on the page, or how did you determine that? How did you say, I want this many panels on this page, I want it to look like this? While you were writing it, did you have the visuals in your head about what that would look like, or did you just try to work it out in terms of the dialogue, like where things would go? Like how do you do that? How do you determine how many panels and what they're supposed to look like on the page?
It was tough, honestly. I've never written for comics before, so it's like a new medium for me. So I looked at so many of the scripts that she sent over from the first anthology and was like, okay, how many panels, like, would open the comic and like read, like, how many panels does this page have? I would count them. How many panels does this page have? This page looks, not that like anybody's looked bad, like, but like this page looks like it has a lot of panels on it. How many panels is a lot of panels? And I would count them. So I was trying to keep in mind the first draft that I turned into Kat. Some of the feedback that came back was, we can condense panels. Like, we don't need, let's try to get a couple less panels on this page, because that'll allow us to have bigger panels, splashier panels, right? Like, I don't have any splash panels because splash pages, because obviously I'm not capable of that as a writer, of paring it down that much, not with it just 8 pages. But, there were a couple of pages, that are 3 panels maybe, that started out as 5 panels or started out as 4 panels. And that in the second draft, I went, can I condense some of the storytelling? Can I give it a little bit more room in some of those panels to like let it breathe, versus, sticking 7 panels on a page or something like that. I think Kat was also like, you probably don't want to give it, don't want it to be more than, 6 panels. And I was like, okay, because I don't know anything about comic writing. I was like, that sounds like gospel to me, and I'm not going to do more than 6 panels because I don't know. I don't want it to be too cluttered looking. So the figuring out how many panels was going to be on each page kind of went along as I was telling the story, and going like, okay, here I want a panel to be a little bit bigger, or here I want to stick a little bit more story, so I'm going to try to put a couple more panels in this page.
And was that sort of determined by dialogue?
Yeah, some of that was by dialogue. A lot of it was by like what was happening in the story and like how to get from A to B. So, and I wanted to make some decent page flips too, which I don't know that I did like a masterful job at, but like, having something at the bottom of the page that would make you want to go to the next page. I think I was trying to be mindful of that, but obviously as my first time going through, I'm not sure if I did like a perfect job of that. But yeah, it was more as I was writing it along going like, "Oh, I need this character to get to this point to do this." I think I had a time jump in the issue in the story as well. So, I wanted to give that time jump panel like a little bit more space to breathe. So that was one where I was like, "Okay, when I do the time jump, I want that to be a bigger panel." And that means I'm going to have to pare down what's like on the rest of that page.
So, what is the relationship between a writer of a comic book and the artist? Because I see in your script that you provided me. Thank you very much. I think this is very helpful to look at
Yeah.
in terms of the process. That you did write some descriptions of things. So, what is there a fine line of writing too much description or not writing enough? How do you collaborate with the artist at all, or do you just try to give enough description for the artist to start going somewhere?
Yeah, I honestly can't say enough about how good my artist was. I've been like joking with Kat and Phil and Dan that like I don't know why you guys complain about about how hard it is to do comics. This seems so simple to me because I think I was the last one in, the last story in, and the first story done, like the first story wrapped because my artist was so fast. And so we gave, I think, I believe her name is Alexandra. She's an Italian artist. She's really, really great. And I will give you her Kickstarter, not her Instagram name, but so we just gave her the script and she provided us with some sketches and I was like, "Oh, okay." And we got those sketches and we looked them over. We gave her like a little bit of feedback. We honestly didn't have to give her all that much. That's how good she is. Her name's Alessandra, and I'm going to probably brutalize her last name, Canzanella. And she is at Alex EYNNE on Instagram. But she got back to us and she got us some like rough sketches and we were like, okay. We gave her a couple of little edits. She sent us back a more formalized version. We gave her maybe another round of small edits. And then she sent us back the colorized version. It was pretty much done. Like it was a very seamless process. And I hope because there was a decent amount of description that I put into the script that it hopefully made the process of doing the art for it easier, but I don't know. I've heard from Kat and Phil and Dan that like everybody's kind of different in how much description that they put in, and I'm sure that I've heard that reading interviews with comic writers. There's some that like give very bare bones descriptions. There's some that write like just huge chunks of description. I think I wasn't writing a huge, I wasn't writing a novel as a description, but I think I was hopefully giving enough that like, because I was imagining in my head what it looked like. And then I was like, okay, let's hope for the best. But yeah, I think it seems like every comic writer is different in how much description that they give and how much they leave up to the artists, you know, ideas and perspectives. And I can say like when she got back some of the stuff, I was like, "Oh, that's better than I was thinking. Like that's better than I thought of it in my head." And I just thought that the process of working with her was so nice and seamless. We didn't ever we've never like spoken like you and I are speaking. We was all over email. But I thought she did like a really amazing job and I think that her her art is so beautiful and her colors are so good too. I thought the way everything was so colorful was so great. And I was talking earlier about the time jump. There's a time jump, of course, in an 8-page story. Why wouldn't you have a time jump? That makes sense. Why wouldn't you try to shove an entire rom-com movie into 8 pages? Good job, Morgan. But I was so impressed with, like, I think I gave like a very brief description of like, oh, their house is like very homey and has like a lot of plants, and it's a beautiful like big panel, and it really did make it come alive in a way that I was like, oh, I didn't even think about all of that, but that looks great. And like, yeah, that's it kind of exactly what was thinking about, but better. And so it's, I will say, is like somebody who primarily does like prose writing, the experience of like seeing somebody take the story I wrote and put art to it was like wild. It was just like, I can't believe that like you bothered to draw what I wrote. Like, even though I knew it was happening, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it's so nice that you did that. And it just came out so nice. Yeah. So the process of working with the artist was like very, very seamless, which I am told is not always the case, and that I should not have expected that. And it's not easy, Morgan. But for me, it was like the back and forth with her was so quick and easy, and she took direction. She didn't fight us on things. I've heard some stories about, some artists being a little picky if you're like, hey, could you change that? And they're like, it's my vision. We were like, hey, could you like change that? And she's like, yeah, here, look it. Here you go. I was like, great. No problem.
That's good. It sounds like it was a very collaborative process, and I do think that is pretty cool to have something you wrote come alive like that. That's a pretty awesome thing. So I'm glad it went as seamless as it did for you, even though that's probably not the norm. I'm glad that for your first attempt at comic book writing, it was something very positive and natural in some ways, even though you were kind of just having to imagine it in your head. So that I'm glad to hear that was a good experience. Well, I'm just curious because we read on Supergirl Radio. I know you read comics outside of Supergirl Radio, but we talk a lot about things on the podcast that maybe a comic could have done better, or maybe we didn't think was well handled, or maybe we liked a certain thing about a comic. So we critique it and we analyze it. So was there anything from your experience in reading comics that you either wanted to put into your story, or were there things about comics that you've read that you're like, ugh, I'm not doing that, I'm going to avoid that? Was there anything like that when you were actually in the process of writing your story?
Yeah, I mean, I think having read a good amount of comics helped a lot in writing one. I think that's like, obviously it feels obvious to say it, but I mean, I think it really did help to know the medium and to have read as many comics, and to remember like, oh, this one I liked, and this one I didn't think worked as well. And to trying to make it kind of, snappy on the page, and to make the dialogue really work for the medium. I feel like I did draw on stuff that we've read and critiqued, and like, tried to apply those do's and don'ts to as best as I could. But yeah, I definitely do think like reading comics, if somebody's out there is interested in writing their own comic, like reading them is really a great way to start. Because it really does give you the cadence of like how comics work, and how, how many panels to put on pages. And like I said, when I was like, I don't know how many panels to put on a page, how do I know this? I was literally opening up, and looking at comics and going counting 1, 2, 3. Okay, this one has 5. The next page has 6. The next page has 3. Okay, so I can vary it up, and things like that. So yeah, for sure. I mean, I wish I had the economy of storytelling to have done a splash page, because I think that would have been really fun. I don't, and that's something I acknowledge and accept about myself. But I think that just knowing the medium really did help. And I think as much as we do these comic reviews, I think that actually helped as well, because we've been, we don't just like read them and go, okay, that's fun. We like critique them and like look at the art and look at the, how the art tells the story, and how the words in the art work together. And I was hoping to do that as well, because I did have, I had some voiceover and stuff like that, which is, something I've seen from comics that we've been reading. The Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is a perfect example of some the voiceover. Bubbles turns out to be, spoiler alert, Ruthie's book narration, but like
thank goodness.
woo-hoo. But yeah, I was like, oh yeah, well, I can do a voiceover. I can tell some of this story in voiceover. It doesn't all have to be in dialogue.
So what I'm hearing is you may not have a Turid Golden Axe in your story.
I wish. If only there was a Turin Golden Axe, and that would have been, I think, the perfect way to end it, is just like at the end, before the happy ending, Turin Golden Axe just jumps up and is like, ah, and then it's like, to be continued.
Just have a character that had no prior experience in the story that came in, you have no idea who it is, and then they leave and you're like, why were they here? That's always a good thing to put in your comic book story.
I think specifically Turin Golden Axe should just be in every comic. That character
just always like make a surprise appearance in every comic.
It's like, oh my god, it's Turin.
Every comic you read is like, I wonder when it's gonna happen. When's she coming
in? Just poking up from the bottom of a panel.
If I ever wrote a comic, I would put Turin Golden Axe in it, probably. That's pretty cool. Well, I'm glad to hear your thoughts on that, because I was wondering if your critiquing of comics played any part into your actual writing process. So looking back on your comic writing experience, what did you take away from the process, and maybe how would that apply? Like, how would your experience writing a comic, do you think, would apply to how you read comics in the future, how you analyze or critique them for specifically Supergirl Radio? Do you think you would have takeaways for the next time you look at a story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just made me more aware of what the writing process is like for comics, and how different it is from other mediums. Like, obviously, writing prose is way different than writing for, comics, or like screenwriting or a screenplay. I mean, I think comics is kind of closer to like the screenplay idea. So I did a couple of those when I did like the NYC Midnights, and those were the first time I had ever written any screenplays, and I was like, I don't know how to do this either. But I was like, I'll figure it out. And so I think that kind of started me on a path of like having to think visually. Like, obviously, it's not going to ever get filmed or anything, but like, if it was, how would that look? And like, what would that be like? And like, what story would you tell with that? And you have to kind of think visually. And I think that really helps for the comic book writing. So yeah, I think it'll help, like, as we talk about future Supergirl stories, to think about how the comic book writer is putting things together, and to think about how the artist is taking what they might put, what scripts they might get, and interpreting it. I can, just thinking about Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, I can imagine, I don't know, but I can imagine that Tom King maybe gave Bilquis Everly's like, oh, Supergirl is standing over the town. And then she's like, okay, great. The town is the most beautiful town you've ever seen. And the sky is full of colors. And it's like, I mean, I don't know that did Tom King put in that, like, there's colors everywhere? Or is that just her art style? And he was like, great, that works really well for the comic. And I think, for a one shot like what I did, I was, Kat had sent me, this is who's going to be the artist on your story. And I went through her Instagram and saw all her great art. And I was like, score. But I think for ongoing titles, you get used to the artist, an issue or two comes out and they start to work with each other, and then they start to know like what the art style is like, so they could also write to it. So it's kind of like what you hear on, TV shows where it's like, oh, this actor is bringing this certain something to a role, so then we started writing to it. But I think that like comic book writers can do that with the art as well. So I think that's definitely something I'm going to keep in mind for future, for future runs that we read. Like, does the storytelling start to utilize the art a little bit better as things go along, as the artist and the writer work together more often?
Interesting. Well, what do you hope people? I know the story's not very long, just 8 pages, but what do you hope people maybe get out of it? What do you hope they after they're finished reading it? What do you hope they get out of it?
I just hope that they enjoy it. I wanted to write a story that was just like a fun rom-com story, because I know that the bi visibility anthology, it's really tackling the topic of bisexuality and being bisexual from a bunch of different perspectives, and some of those are going to be heavier and some of those are going to be more focused on the experience and the community. And I just wanted to tell like a fun rom-com story, like a rom-com story that I would like to see. Um, because I feel like sometimes, queer movies can either be, can sometimes be really, really heavy, and we don't get those like kind of hallmarky, those classic rom-com films. And I was just like, what would be fun would be to have a classic rom-com film where the two leads just happen to be women. And I thought that that's kind of what I wanted to bring to it. I wanted to bring, kind of the sort of the ditzy one and like the straight-laced one, where at the end it's she's like, oh, I've got an idea, but it's going to involve a costume change. And the love interest is like, all of your ideas involve costume changes. It's, it's the kind of the grumpy and the sunshine one. It's a well-worn trope, but I was like, those tropes, we like them for a reason.
Right.
So yeah, I think if you read the story and you just came out of it smiling and having enjoyed the ride, then I think I did a good job.
Cool. Well, I know we've talked about the independent comic world, but I'm curious if you could write a comic story for any of the big
Oh.
comic book companies, whether it be DC Comics or that other company, Marvel, or you mentioned Image Comics. If you could write any comic book for any comic book character, which character would you want to tackle?
Oh, that's such a great question. I feel like my answer is so
It
boring
doesn't have to be Supergirl.
because my answer is Supergirl.
I just wanted to give you that out if you needed the out.
Yeah, no, I would love to write a Supergirl story, and I think part of the reason is because obviously synergy, right? Right, synergy. I'm a marketing person. But we've read so many Supergirl stories, and I think another part is just like I feel like so many of the Supergirl stories that we've written, they just don't seem to get the character or are not very interested in the character. I think there's definitely been some runs that have been really phenomenal that we've read. But there's been like a lot of stuff in between where it feels like they just don't really know what to do with Supergirl, like DC in general, maybe the writer in particular. They're just like, I don't know. We've got Supergirl here. So I would just like, as a big fan of hers, I would like to get a chance to tell a Supergirl story that's focused on Supergirl and sort of tells a story that about her. And I would like to get the opportunity to tell something that's maybe a little bit weird and funny, and wacky. And I don't think that every Supergirl story has to be, I mean, with stakes and stuff like that, but I don't think every Supergirl story has to be, the end of the world and cyborg Superman is coming and he's gonna kill everyone.
And he's gonna turn all your dead relatives into cybernetic creatures and resurrect them.
Where's your hand? I don't know. Like, just get me like a Supergirl story, maybe Mr. Bones is the
Well, this leads into my last question. So
Okay.
maybe we should save it for this question.
Oh, okay.
So if Supergirl Radio, if you and I could write a Supergirl comic book story, what would it need to be about, and which
Mm.
elements of Supergirl mythology should it include?
Oh my God. Okay.
Like if you and I were sitting down
Yes.
to do this.
The Supergirl Radio take on Supergirl. I think we would need to have some great villains. I think we both believe strongly in having great villains. I think if I was going to pitch some villains, one of them would be Director Bones.
Yeah, 100%.
Whether or not he's Mr. or Director, whether he's climbed that corporate ladder.
He needs a character arc.
He starts as Mr. Bones, by the end he's Director Bones. I love the idea of Nasty Luther. Love the idea of Nasty Luther coming to befriend Kara, and then just like being real nasty. Like she's just like the perfect frenemy, where like Kara even kind of hates her and she kind of hates Kara, but she's like using all of her like stuff to take down Supergirl. I love the idea of Kara having to go up against Nasty Luther. I also love the idea of us throwing in Rama Khan.
Oh, okay.
But I think that like it in our conception of Supergirl, maybe Supergirl has to go and fight somebody, and she's got to go talk to somebody who knows. So she has to go talk to Rama Khan, who is a retired villain, out on his winery, offering her some Rama wines, and he's kind of like he's like her Silence of the Lambs Hannibal Lecter, who she has to go to for advice.
She's Clarice going to see Hannibal Lecter,
and just like every time she has to she's like, yes, no, this, you have the best wine and cheese pairings, Rama Khan, but I don't have time for a charcutes right now. What she has to do to get the information out of him isn't like torture him or like really like rough him up or like use any wiles on him. She just has to sit down and have a charcuterie board with him, but like every single time she's like, I'm getting so bloated from all the cheese.
I like these ideas. I think we should start writing this story. I think we should start workshopping this a little more.
What would you put into a Supergirl Radio?
I actually like the inclusion of Nasty Luther because Nasty has not really been used since like the 70s, 80s. So she's a character who's primed to come back.
She's ready.
Especially since the Supergirl TV show really wanted to use a lot of the Luthers, but never explored Nasty. And
I know.
I always felt like that was a big missed opportunity. It would be fun to bring Leslie Lar back. I think that would be fun, talking about, big villains. But I guess now I'm trying to think of like characters who could team up with her. Well, I don't know if this would be a team up book, but maybe also
a Nasty Luther Leslie Lar situation.
They could team up together,
like a Super and a Luther on the opposite side.
I was thinking that maybe also like, what if Nasty and Kara had to be put in a situation where they had to work together?
Oh, that's fun. I always love those.
I always wanted something like that to happen on the TV show, and they never gave me like the Eliza Danvers, Lillian Luther team up that I always wanted. So maybe Nasty would have to. And maybe they wouldn't like it at first, but maybe, it's one of those old, you talked about tropes, like an old trope where like, maybe they're not so bad after all. Like maybe they become friends. A lot of my pitches involve characters becoming friends, because that's something that I want to see in some of these stories. But
it's like an unlikely animal friendship.
But I think, Comet would definitely have to be there in some form or fashion.
Definitely.
Maybe Comet's a horse at the winery.
Oh,
maybe just out in the fields. I think that can maybe work.
She just follows her home. She's like, why is this horse following me? And he's like, I love you. I'm cursed to be a horse, but I'm really a man.
So I think those would be some really good elements to explore. I always like Supergirl stories where she goes into the bottle city of Kandor. That's a lot of fun.
Yes, those are always fun.
So that's a good time.
I'd love to get Snapper on there.
Oh yes.
But like maybe he starts out good and then goes evil. Like as the story progresses. He,
So
like,
would you rather
loses
have
those
him?
hands.
So would you rather have Robot Hand or Starzar, or would you want both? Do you think?
I
Do
feel
you
like
think we can put both in?
I think we can do both. I think he starts out as like a helper, right? Like, oh, this is my, my good friend Snapper Carr, and then tragedy strikes, and once he gets those robot hands, like all bets are off.
He's
gone to the dark side.
twist. He's the twist in the story that
Yes,
you didn't
yes.
see coming. Yeah.
He
No,
like goes full Vader, and he's just like, I can't stop snapping.
I like that idea. So I think that would be pretty cool. I would be into reading that story. I think we've started something that could be workshopped and fleshed out a little bit. So I think we're we're onto something with some of those pitches. So thank you for just throwing out some Supergirl stories that maybe we could write, because I don't know, I think we have some knowledge that maybe I could pitch a vision, and then you would be able to write it, because I'm not a great writer. So I can say that because I've tried. So I am not a writer per se, but maybe I could give you some ideas. Okay, well, I think this is going to do it for this episode of Supergirl Radio. Thank you for joining me, Morgan. Thank you for letting me pick your brain about your comic book writing process and learning more about what you did for your story. I guess maybe just like every interviewee that we have on the podcast, I just want to ask you, where can our listeners and viewers find out more about, how can they get in touch with you or keep in touch with you if they would like to follow you online?
Oh, sure. Well, I'd love to hear from your listeners. I bet they're great people. They can find me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Mojotastic. They can also find me on the Legends of Tomorrow podcast, which is what led me to this fun opportunity, and also on DC TV After Dark. And if any of them happen to have any other comic writing opportunities, I would definitely take them up on that. And I may or may not put Director Bones into it if it's possible, or just another type of skeleton man. Listen, the possibilities are endless, and I'm here for all of it. Spooky season is right around the corner, if you believe it is.
Well, as a reminder, if you'd like to back the Kickstarter project, check out the link in the video description of this video on the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, or the audio show notes for this episode of Supergirl Radio in your podcast feed, wherever you listen to Supergirl Radio. And Kat Calamia, your co-host on Legends of Tomorrow, the Legends of Tomorrow podcast, told us that there were some trading cards available that were inspired by stories in the anthology, like Morgan's, and they will be available for purchase. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
It's really cool to see a character that you created end up on a trading card. There's a trading card for Ava, the love interest in my story, and she's got like stats. So I guess you can you could get a bunch of the trading cards and, like, I don't know, create a game in some way. Do it and tell me how it works.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. All right. Well, before we start getting into our Supergirl Radio and DC TV podcast plugs, we'd like to plug the podcast hosting platform that we here at Supergirl Radio have been using since 2015. And we'll share a little information about an opportunity that is being offered until June 30th. In case you've ever thought, hey, maybe I would want to start a podcast of my own, here is a way that you can do it. If you're looking to start a podcast, use Supergirl Radio's unique promo code SUPER to get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn when you sign up for a new account. Get your show on Apple and Spotify, get helpful audience building stats, and all the support you need to sound your best. And hey, they can even do video. Bring your podcast to life and have your voice heard with Libsyn. Click on the link in the live stream video description or our audio podcast show notes. All right, now it's time to get to our Supergirl Radio and DC TV podcast plugs. If you would like to contact Supergirl Radio, you can post a comment on our website at supergirlradio.com. You can email us at supergirlradio@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can call us at 678-718-7252. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram, all at Supergirl Radio. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Radio Public, Podchaser, and Spotify, where we also have a Spotify playlist that includes music featured on and inspired by the CW's Supergirl TV series. We are listed on DC's fan page, which you can find at dccomics.com/DC-fans. If you like what we do, we encourage you to give us a rating and write us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy our Supergirl Radio live streams, make sure to subscribe to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel and hit that notification bell to get notified when we go live and wired. DC TV Podcast also has a TeePublic store, so if you're in need of new DC TV related t-shirts, tank tops, sweatshirts, onesies, mugs, notebooks, pillows, or stickers, go to supergirlradio.com and click on the TeePublic store link at the top of the page.
Supergirl Radio is part of the DC TV Podcast Network, so if you also like The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Black Lightning, Titans, Doom Patrol, Batwoman, Stargirl, Superman and Lois, and the upcoming Green Lantern, Justice League Dark, and Strange Adventure shows, and DC TV After Dark, you can subscribe to the DC TV Podcast Mega Feed on Apple Podcasts. Follow at DC TV Podcast on Twitter, and like DC TV Podcasts on Facebook, or else. This has been a message from Hope, inhabiting the Flash Vessel, also known as New Rachel.
And to celebrate a Supergirl Radio host writing a comic, check out the Supergirl Radio designs we have in the DC TV Podcast TeePublic store.
Yeah, speaking of Snapper Car, we have some Snap Judgments designs in the TeePublic store. We have mugs, hoodies, t-shirts, all kinds of things. So if you're a big fan of Snap Judgments, you can get some Snap Judgments merch, and we have a game night collection. So if you're looking forward to the next Supergirl Radio game night, you can come correct with your t-shirt or your hoodie or your mug if you prefer to do it that way. So we have lots of Supergirl Radio exclusive merchandise in the DC TV Podcast TeePublic store. All right. Well, I guess this now leads us into thanking our Legion of Super Sponsors for supporting the Supergirl Radio Patreon. These people are Michael, Sam, Anne-Marie, Yvonne, Quinn, Nicola, Leslie, Abby, Irmgard, Miriam, Nicole, Lizette, Faith, Brian, Ethan, and Danny. If you would like to support the Supergirl Radio Patreon, just go to patreon.com/Supergirl Radio. We have 4 monthly levels for memberships, and we appreciate you helping to support the podcast and keeping the lights on over here. And if you would like to check out what I'm doing, you can follow me on Vero at Derby Kid, on Instagram at The Derby Kid, and I also have a personal YouTube channel, youtube.com/DuckMilkProd, where I do film analysis over there. So if you're interested in art criticism, I do some of that over there on my personal YouTube channel as well. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode of Supergirl Radio and my interview with a very special guest comic book writer. So thank you all for watching and listening. But until next time, I'm still Rebecca Johnson.
And I'm still Morgan Glennon. And please consider backing By Visibility, a bisexual anthology. Still by.
McGurk! I love typing.
Not mess with my Google Docs, Meeksy.
Supergirl Radio is going live every night of the week. How do you like it? Is becoming a human burrito a plus or a minus? I don't know. It does seem snug.
I mean, they say you are what you eat.
Kira. I love that.
So I do a podcast called Supergirl Radio, and one of our segments is Lena Luthor, Boardroom or Ballroom. Because
really? She looks like a boss in this coat.
Nasty Luthor like a different Luthor? It's not just Lena being mean?
No.
Sloan Slater here. So fun to know that you're hosting a podcast called Supergirl Radio.
Yeah!